Okay. So let's begin the meeting. Call the meeting to order. The first item on the first agenda is the minutes from November 21st. Is there a motion?
Move to approve the minutes of November 21st, 2023 with any necessary corrections.
Is there a second?
Second.
Go through it. Page 1.
Item number 5, the heading lists the 2024 grant list outlook. It should be grand list outlook.
Yep. Okay. Page 2. Page 3. With the one change on page 1, all those in favor of approving the minutes with that change, say aye.
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 All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. So next on the agenda is public comment. This is a time in the meeting where anybody in the audience or anybody participating online is free to make any comment or alert us to anything at all. Sure. If
Like to, if that's all right.
yeah, is it about something that's on the agenda?
No.
Okay, that's
it
fine.
is. I mean, it's all kind of
Yeah.
together. It's
well,
about all of it, really.
Okay, great. Just yeah, please have a seat. If you could tell us your name and
Yeah. So I am Mia Marinovich, and I am the Williston Community Justice Board Executive Board President.
Board also.
Great. Okay, thank you.
Great. We appreciate the opportunity and proposal general fund operating budget for fiscal year 2025 draft submitted by Town Manager Eric Wells and Town Finance Director Shirley Goodell-Lackey. We know that it's a heavy lift to produce the annual budget draft, given all the considerations therein. Second, we want to acknowledge the hard work put into the recently submitted police services analysis report written by Jim Baker. We recognize the considered thought, research, and analysis Jim Baker put into this report. That said, the Williston Community Justice Center Executive Board wants to express its deep concern over the underfunding and understaffing and underfunding of the WCJCs, given what is expressed in both the draft FY25 operating budget and the Jim Baker Police Services Analysis Report. It is clearly stated in each that Williston's community safety needs are rapidly growing in the face of the town's residential and business growth. Retail theft is exponentially increasing. Mental health crises occur daily and coexist with the current substance abuse crisis. Williston is experiencing the ripple effect of the lack of available and affordable housing, leading towards a public health crisis of homelessness. All of this has affected and strained the services that provide critical elements of the community safety for the town of Williston. We are here tonight to speak directly to how it affects the WCJC. The WCJC provides much more than restorative justice panels, which is a core component of our overall program, but only part of what the WCJC does on a daily basis. Beyond the restorative justice panels, the WCJC provides crisis intervention, resource referrals related to substance abuse, homelessness, hunger, domestic violence, and a multitude of complex and co-occurring social justice issues. These events can occur at any time of day, any day of the week, and they do day after day and week after week. Currently, the WCJC is operating with a full-time executive director and 3 part-time positions that equal a total part-time support of 40 hours per week. The WCJC's workload exceeds staff capacity, resulting in the executive director regularly working 70+ hours a week. This compromises the WCJC's ability to deliver the level of service excellence that Williston deserves. It has also led to staff burnout and challenges to recruit and retain staff. At a minimum, the WCJC requires 2 full-time positions filled by properly trained and skilled professionals to support the executive director. To be clear, what we are saying is that instead of 3 part-time positions at a total of 40 hours a week, the WCJC should be staffed with 2 full-time positions totaling 80 hours per week to support the executive director. The WCJC's executive director's position is massively overloaded and woefully undercompensated for the volume of work and the type of skilled expertise it takes to successfully run the WCJC. The WCJC's executive director's salary comes in about 30% below peer level within Vermont. To review the current funding structure, the WCJC's greatest source of funding comes from the Vermont Department of Corrections. Much to the town's credit, Williston has stepped up to supplement the unmet needs of the WCJC in the town's operational budget. Despite these efforts, the actual needs of the WCJC are not adequately met. The WCJC's service areas include Heinsberg, Richmond, Huntington, Bolton, St. George, the Champlain Valley School District, the Mount Mansfield Union School District. Of these entities, only the town of Williston provides funding to the WCJC. We recommend that steps be taken to request funding from these service towns in either annual allotments or fee-for-service model. The WCJC Executive Board urgently requests the Williston Selectboard to consider the necessary steps to properly staff and fund the WCJC to meet the increasing community safety needs of Williston as we face the demands of our growing town. Those immediate WCJC needs would include the WCJC Executive Director received a proper pay grade leveling and compensation equal to the training, skills, and expertise required, and comparable to peer CJC Executive Directors' compensation in Vermont. We would like to see this change occur in the FY24, utilizing any appropriate set-aside funds that could apply and subsequently funded in the FY25 budget. Also, 2 full-time trained and skilled staff members to be included in the FY25 operating budget. These considerations address the very floor of the operating and ongoing successful WCJC, which contributes critical components to the comprehensive community safety program in the town of Williston. The WCJC Executive Board is ready and willing to provide any additional support and helpful input to the Select Board regarding this request. Again, thank you for this opportunity to present and listen to our request.
Thank you.
I just wanted to add like a testimony from someone who had the privilege of coming to the CJC and being reintroduced back into the community. I was going for a walk around Maple Place and I ran into this very young gentleman, and he said, "Oh, I know you." And I was astonished. I didn't recognize him. And then he said, "Williston," and I said, "Oh," and he told me his name. And then he went on to explain to me, or in fact to inform me, that he was able to keep his driver's license. And I wouldn't go into details as to what he was involved in, but he was able to keep his driver's license. And now also he is registered in the Vermont Tech College. You know, I bring this to your attention to show that this young man, let me assume if he went to prison, that would be a cost to society. And attending college, he is now sort of informing himself or rehabilitating himself, making himself more useful to the community. You know, I see this as economists call it the multiplier effect. You know, you do a good, and it tends to have this cascading effect because of the good that it does to other people, because this young man is going to do good for other people in the community. It is difficult to measure the cost of when you sort of redeem somebody from their transgression in the community, when that person is contributing to the community. That cost is very difficult to measure. I used to be a cost accountant, and I know all the complexity that you have to go through sometimes to do that. I just wanted to mention that to show you how useful the CJC is. It's growing as is being read there, and if it's growing, it means also that I look at the budget. I saw that the WPD budget is increased by 9%, but the section for the CJC seems to remain the same. So, you know, if it's growing, if the tongue is growing, I would assume that the CJC should grow with it also. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there other public comments? Come on up.
Good evening. My name is Lori Deering, and I'm from the Williston Woods Cooperative up off North Williston Road. And I don't know if this is the right place, but I understand there's some ARPA money that the town is deciding. And my question is, could we be eligible to maybe piggyback onto it? As you may or may not know, Williston Woods Co-op is for low to medium income senior citizens only. And we have 2 septic fields that are failing currently. We are applying for everything, but additionally, we just had to send in $12,000 for our 3-acre fund. The 3-acre project. That's going to cost us close to between $500,000 and $700,000. So we're looking for any opportunities, that maybe the town has that we can piggyback on. Unfortunately, the state of Vermont does not recognize mobile home parks as nonprofit. So we are also looking to change that. But again, that's going to be more money down the road that unfortunately the senior community does not have. And I'm wondering if there's a resource, or are you the resource, or what we may need to look into, because I don't think we're going to make it.
I know the stormwater request was part of the public input. The request for help with the 3-acre stormwater.
Yeah.
That's on our list to consider with ARPA.
Okay.
I didn't know about sewage, but that's something you probably.
Yeah, and Bruce Hoare reached out to you last week, Public Works Director.
Who did?
Did Bruce reach out to Williston Woods, or he may have I asked him to follow up with some folks there.
If you did, I'm not aware of it.
Okay. Oh, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, certainly with the select board considering ARPA funding and looking at different state opportunities as well, there might be something in this for the septic. If you haven't looked into it already.
Okay. There was one that we did apply for a grant that we'll know the end of January. But that was for the first septic field that just failed, and now a second one is failing. So we're really, reaching out every which way. So who do I need to, is Bruce who?
Bruce Hoare, Director of Public Works.
Public Works. Okay, super. Then I will reach out to him and see where we can go from that. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Come on.
Okay, I'm not even gonna sit down.
Okay.
Stand up. Seems fun. I don't even need that. I'm here.
You do for
You
that.
need order to be recorded.
Need it for television.
It doesn't amplify it, just.
I first off want to thank all of you for your dedication to Williston. And I don't envy your job because everything seems to require a little bit more green. But I want to come and thank you from the bottom of my heart for allowing me to be part of the steering committee for the Williston Community Center. It was very, it's an important project for me. And I think with everything that was presented at our meeting, you see that it's something that's very much wanted. And I know you're going to talk about it, but I'm kind of planting seed, and I'm going to water it, to say that we have some momentum going. And I'm going to help you however I can, that we don't lose that momentum. And I think seeing the needs of Williston, this is going to have to be very creative. So we got a lot of creative minds in Williston, but I mostly wanted to thank you and say, let's keep pushing forward. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you, Lynn.
Yeah.
Anybody else with a public comment? Eric, is there anybody online?
Nope, no one.
Okay. So next on the agenda, the public service report, continued discussion. So Jim Baker is here and Chief Foley, if you could come up to the table. Eric, could you give a little bit of an introduction for us?
So the board and the community heard consultant Jim Baker, who we hired and tasked with taking a look at our police department service delivery. Jim delivered a report to the select board back on November the 7th. Jim's back this evening along with Chief Foley to continue discussion with questions the board has, any questions from members of the community. Set aside some time on the agenda this evening to continue that dialogue, and staff will take any direction the board has for any further information or discussion.
Welcome. Thank you. So I'm not sure if you have more of a presentation or an overview, or if you're waiting for us to ask you.
Yeah, I don't have anything else besides what I spoke about at the November meeting. So, I mean, I'm open for questions or feedback or, any follow-up that needs to be done to answer questions for the board.
Okay. Are there any questions, comments, or feedback from the board?
I have a few, but I might be quicker. Okay, so a little bit for Chief, a little bit for you, either one. So yeah, obviously we're talking about the hiring of many new staff, and having a satellite facility possibly was one of your recommendations too. But in touring the facility, recently, Chief, you mentioned that there was the capacity to have new staff. Assuming that we hired the full gamut of staff that was being recommended, what is the capacity of our current police facility? Could we house that many staff? Would that be another additional cost, expanding the facility that we'd be looking at?
My feeling is that we can adequately staff the building with the additional staff. Again, it's not, the way we've discussed this is not going to happen overnight. We're not going to dump 14 people in our lobby and say, go to work. We're talking about a 5-year plan out, so you can gradually add to those positions. The storefront operation at Maple Tree Place it'd be like a satellite office to meet and greet people. Officers could, do their work in that building and still patrol on foot and all that. We have various, this office, you saw the office space upstairs that we can accommodate, different offices up there. So again, it'll be a work in progress, but, I think we can make it work and see how it works in the beginning. Then I think by just doing it piecemeal, maybe 3, 4 first year, and then, the second year, maybe just add 1, just as we plan to build this out. So you're not really getting the entire, massive growth at the same time. So it gives us time to plan, move people around and all that.
Chief, just on that, I'm thinking about increasing shift size. You're talking about different people on patrol at once, maybe the officers room downstairs for that, and the other space more specialties for division. So I'm just thinking how people would be flowing in and out of that building. Thinking about the officers room downstairs would have capacity to support shifts of more than.
And we started that, we have an office up there for the lieutenant's position, and, it could be where it's shared with both lieutenants. Where the K-9 officer is, we've got adequate space to put BCI in there, put the traffic unit in there, and we have additional office space upstairs. So we can make it work. There's rooms in there that are utilized as conference rooms. We don't need two of them. We have two of them up there right now. We can downsize one and use that as an office space. So, you know, we're creative, you know, and, you know, what our plan is that each shift would be a supervisor plus 4. So it'll be a 5, you know, so we'd have enough space downstairs to accommodate the supervisors and the additional manpower. When we had the pandemic, you know, we designed that so we had adequate spacing. We went from 200 square feet to 600 square feet, so there's adequate room downstairs.
Great. Thank you. My other question was relating to, I had asked the last time about, you know, we've had a challenge just hiring for the open positions that we've currently had. Several of the recommendations are to hire kind of supervisory positions or kind of senior level positions. Is the outlook for hiring for those positions different, or, you know, would it be along the same lines? In terms of, you know, everybody's trying to hire from the same pool and there just isn't, you know, the capacity to fill those positions.
Well, I think what we've done is we sent 4 of the officers, a sergeant, 2 patrol officers, and my administrative assistants to a class on recruitment and retention and all that. So they've come back with good ideas, and that we've implemented it. You know, at the beginning of the summer, we're 5 positions down. We're currently 2 positions down. We have 1 in the queue right now that the town manager and I need to sit down and interview ourselves. I've been told today that there's additional people that are interested in coming in to the agency. One of our newest hires, she'll begin the beginning of January. She has no law enforcement experience, but she's going to go to the academy in February, and she came out of Rhode Island, and we advertised in a weekly newspaper in Rhode Island that attracted her. I'm not sure they believe that I'm leaving, because I've taken a lot of calls since everybody thinks I'm retiring. And, but I've been reached out by senior command people that be willing to join us here. So, you know, we'll look at our in-house staff first to see who our strengths are. I always tell them that we look at our strengths and weaknesses and continue to build on our strength and work on our weaknesses. And we have a good staff here. They're all sticking together. They're all working hard. So it's going to be a work in progress. And that's why I wouldn't recommend dumping 14 new positions on us, even though it's not all law enforcement. You know, 11 are patrol, you know, law enforcement positions, and then you have the data analysis, you have the outreach, and another assistance for my administrative assistant. But you know, the law enforcement, everybody's in the same boat. You know, and I think once people see our plan here and how we're going to build it out, I think people see the growth in this department, the chance for opportunities, the new programs that we're going to implement, and trying to get people in specialized units. I think we're going to have people knocking out of doors overwhelmingly.
Great. And then the last one, I'm sorry, I'm sure you have questions. So thinking about the satellite facility, and, you know, we've talked about it, you know, as well, you know, in our ARPA discussions. I just kind of want more specifics about how the logistics of that work. I know that you know, it would be the location for the CJC and, you know, kind of the satellite office, but in terms of infrastructure, you know, would you be able to dispatch officers directly from there? Like, would they be permanently located in there? Would they, you know, I know when we moved the dispatch to Essex, there was some infrastructure needs in terms of, you know, communication stuff and computer. Oh my God, I'm so computer proficient. But like computer and data needs and things like that had to be, you know, transferred there. So would that be difficult? It would, you know, I'm not quite sure you know, how that would work.
It's not going to be difficult. It's going to be an office. We have cell phones, we have portables, we have mobile data terminals in our cruisers. The cruisers will be close by. It's basically allow a spot for the officer to be there, walk around Maple Tree Place. We don't have a bus line that comes to 7928 Williston Road anymore. So the people that CJC are dealing with that are homeless, that are unhoused, that have issues, You know, they might not even have a cell phone. They don't even have addresses, but if they can get on the bus and come to Maple Tree Place where the bus line is, it brings them there. So and that's one of the concerns we had, that they're not getting, you know, transportation down here. So let's have an office there. Let them set up a time, you know, 1 day a week or 2 days a week that their clients can come in and meet with them, you know, set up the program, understand what they need. We can have our outreach people in there offering services. And then, you know, people can walk in and file a complaint with the officer. All he has to do is call on the radio to dispatch, or call on the phone to dispatch, or enter the call in as MDT. So it's a lot of departments have them. A lot of agencies have them, where you can see it's a storefront operation.
Do you, are there other towns that, like, just for comparison's sake, like locally or statewide, that have that we could model kind of that after, or?
Yeah, I think not necessarily a remote spot like that, but there are models where non-traditional resources are embedded inside an agency. I mean, Rutland's one of them. I mean, you know, when I was the chief there, Project Vision came online. I'm doing some other work right now for the state, and I know that Springfield is moving towards the same model, looking at taking non-traditional resources and embedding them in that case, it would be inside the PD too, but it's a different set of circumstances there, as the chief said. One comment, I just kind of go back to your original point about staffing. You know, the chief and I were chatting, and he shared with me, he's getting phone calls already. And I want to remind you, when we talked the last time, I mean, I believe that people are going to want to go to places where there's stuff happening that makes a difference. And I think he's starting to see that already. He's getting phone calls based upon the report coming out with the recommendation about public safety, public health coming together and figuring out how to mitigate some of those issues in the community that's affecting quality of life.
That's over me.
Fast enough.
I have one really concrete question and then a broader one that I'm looking at your recommended organization structure, and you have 3 patrol, a corporal, and a sergeant. Are they all patrol officers? Will they all be out making calls, or it looks
Yeah.
like it looks very top heavy if you just said that you only have 12 people.
No, what it is with the corporal, and the sergeant is the supervisor on the shifts. So the way he has it drawn up is that we have 2 divisions. We'd have an administrative division that would oversee, you know, the outposts, CJC personnel, making sure everything's getting done, and then the patrol side. So we divide up that. In the collective bargaining unit, we've added, you know, discussions for a corporal's position, because since we have limited rank structure and growth, this is a way to reward somebody. So they're still patrol officers. So my plan would be, it'd be a sergeant, the shift supervisor, a corporal, and probably 2 additional officers there. So they're all working officers.
Okay, yeah. So I think this is really exciting, and it's a great direction, and I appreciate that you're not asking us to do it all next year. Because I think things are changing really fast in Vermont right now, and I think whether it's adding 11 sworn officers or 8 sworn officers and more, I don't want to say social work, like community outreach kind of crisis professionals. You know, I could see the community going that way instead. But I think it's great to have a structure that you could start down and change from, rather than not know where you're going. So I think that's all great. And I was just kind of wondering, is there other things on the radar that you think are changing in policing in Vermont? I mean, we kind of know where we are right now, right? We have substance use disorder issues everywhere. We have homelessness issues everywhere. We seem to have a huge, larceny or retail theft going on, but things change. So how do you kind of adjust, or how would you see this plan adjusting for future issues?
So I think, and I'm not going to say this because I don't want to scare people, right? Because it's not the situation. But, you know, the chief and I have been in law enforcement for a very long time. If you pick up, you know, all you have to do is check the news every Monday. And there's a lot of gunplay going on in the state right now. There's stuff that I haven't experienced, and I'm not active law enforcement right now, but I'm pretty active in interacting with communities, especially down south right now, on another project I'm doing. So I think, thinking about how to do violence intervention in communities is, and I'm not saying Williston is there, but it wouldn't take but one incident to really put the community at a level of fear that you've got to be able to mitigate that fear to begin with. And I think on the horizon with this conversation around public safety and public health merging together, where the conversation's been going on for a while in other areas around the country, there's going to be more conversations about how to intervene in violence and prevent violence, especially with younger generation. Because if you notice, a lot of this violence that has been happening in the last year or so is really involving folks of an age range from anywhere from 16 up to 22, 23 years old. And there are a lot of well-researched, well-documented violence intervention programs that in fact are effective. So going back to the structure. So when I'm, again, I tried to share with you last time my thought process as I collected the information and was thinking about delivering a report to you. This structure is designed to be able to be flexible like that. You could change that outreach piece on the fly. Right now, the issue is shoplifting and larcenies. Well, that could change down the road. And it goes back to that conversation about co-production and safety and how you engage all resources you can to include community members to engage in addressing a specific issue. And if you started seeing that type of situation with young adults, I think this structure could adjust very quickly to come up with strategies to be able to deal with that. If that makes sense to you.
I think so.
Because this, continue the discussion, what Jim was saying is that 2 weeks ago, my staff met with the business community and we invited them into our building and we have about 30 businesses that was represented and we had a good session there, explaining what we needed from them and what they expected of us. REI, they reached out to us to have our officers work in details there, 7 days a week during the Black Friday weekend. Walmart reached out to us and all that. We just couldn't staff it and all that. But we're doing creative, we're going in and out of the businesses. We're doing foot patrol in business just to be visible, to maybe stop it. But it's a combination of things. Everybody's saying that it's the homelessness problem, it's the mental health problem, it's the drug problem. But who is coming up with the solution to stop it? You create an excuse for what they're, but these people we're dealing with is not, I understand CJC and the purpose of that. And that works with somebody who just lost their job and need to get meals on the table and all that. But these career criminals that are doing it day in and day out, it's got to stop. And you got to, say enough is enough. And I think it's an entire state problem. It's not just a Williston problem or Chittenden County problem and all that. Chief Murad was on the Kurt Wright show the other morning, and he articulated, the same thing we were talking about. We've got to have an answer, and we have to have a solution. Don't make an excuse with no consequences. It's just like you're having a cut, and you say, "Oh, it's bleeding." Put a Band-Aid on, stop it, and they'd rather see it still bleed and not fix it. There's a lot of fixes that everybody needs to work together, like Jim was saying.
It was just two comments. Well, I was reading the 2021 Burlington Police Analysis Report, similar to this, and then a couple other places too. But some without citing their evidence. There was some comment that I read that was like it's a better deterrent for a person to think to be pretty sure they're going to get caught in the act than it is for them to worry about having to go to jail for it. So being able to capture them as opposed to
There's a lot of studies out there to talk about this. It's not, and this goes to the chief's point, it's not so much about what the punishment is, it's how quickly the consequence comes to the incident that is a deterrent to stay clear of continuing that behavior.
And that was actually the second thing I was going to ask you was that I understand you were at that Rutland town meeting.
I was.
And I was intrigued with the state representatives saying that they're trying to do some things at the state level to this is my VT jigger, one sentence, but it was basically, if you, in some situations, you could take a lot of misdemeanors and make them into a more serious crime with one court date. So,
Yes, yes.
I don't know if there's, is that, I'm understanding it right? That's
Yeah,
what they're.
and we tried that. We tried that probably 3 or 4 years ago. So somebody hypothetically goes to Best Buy and steals, then they go across the parking lot to Dick's and steals, and then goes to another store. They've created 3 different larcenies or retail thefts. It's the same person. It's the same. It's retail thefts. They should all be combined into one and make it a felony. And that was turned down 3 years ago. So at least maybe it's on the radar. Yeah, it's on the radar again.
I don't know, the Vermont League of City and Towns or something, if we can, get tuned into that, because I think this whole retail theft thing is, I mean, it's related. People are stealing for a reason, and sometimes it's drugs. So that's back to your point, how you stop it at the source. But anyways, I guess my point is that I've been thinking a lot about this is a much bigger than one report. This report's awesome, and I really appreciate having a structure that we have something to look forward to. I like that with flexibility and realities of life, that super helps, but I'm not sure this is the be all and end all, and I'd be interested in what else we can do, because we want this place to be safe. We can't afford to have stores leaving because things aren't safe. We can't afford to have people moving out because we're not safe. Public safety is pretty important, so.
That's the other point. I think I mentioned this when I did the presentation, but when I've been speaking with the chief and Eric, recommending that the criminal investigator position get filled sooner than later. Because to your point, to the chief's point, from what I understand from talking and interviewing folks for this report and working in other parts of the state, this shoplifting is very organized. I mean, the folks that they're catching are not the organization. There's someone behind that, and there's a level of organization to that that's not getting addressed now because agencies in the county are shorthanded. If you had a criminal investigator could follow up on that and get to the source of the folks that are directing those folks to shoplift, it would have at least an impact on the behavior that's affecting your community.
And it's probably an unfair question, but not in your report, but we have a number of small towns around us that have not quite the same type of problem, but they do have problems with coverage. And in part of the 5-year plan, what would your thoughts be about incorporating towns like Richmond and Heinsberg into an overall type of a police force just for Williston and the surrounding area?
Listen, in the assessments I've done in Vermont, I never miss the opportunity, as you'll see in the report, to talk about regionalization. I haven't given a lot of thought. I mean, Chittenden County is a little bit different. I can't picture a complete regionalization of policing in Chittenden County, but I can envision down at your side, going south, regionalization. To take it out of Chittenden County for a minute, I did an assessment of Chester, Vermont Police Department about 1.5 years ago. And when you go down to that part of the state, there's 5 police departments that touch each other geographically that run anywhere from a 2-person to a 5-person to an 8-person to a 17-person police department. Multiple chiefs, multiple policies and procedures, multiple purchases of equipment, multiple purchases of cruiser. They can't keep staff there because it's not big enough to keep people's interest and grow and do different things. And so I never miss the opportunity not to talk about regionalization. Now, it's easier said than done because it always goes. I mean, you all know this. I mean, I know Eric sits on the commission that's looking at regional dispatch. Can't even get regional dispatch done because you worry about startup funds, who's got the authority to oversee. But there are tons of models across the country where regionalization has been done. It's more effective. It creates a more comprehensive response, and I believe it helps with staff. So I don't know, Terry, if that answers your question or not. Okay. I never miss a chance.
Thank you.
And Terry, we had discussions with Richmond, Eric and I, when we got close to full staff, and they were short staffed, but we just couldn't, pull the trigger and say, okay, it would work, or we make it do, because we started losing people again. So, we help out as much as we can, likewise with the state police. But, you know, that was a discussion probably 40+ years ago here in Chittenden County, discussion of regionals as law enforcement. It works in fire services, but a lot easier than, I think the only place it really worked good was down in New Jersey, Camden, where they eliminated the police department and rebuilt it as a county police department, and it's still functioning today.
Other questions or comments? We are a couple of minutes ahead of schedule, and I don't want to turn this into a free-for-all, but is there anybody here who would like to make a comment or ask a question? If you could, I don't want to be rude, but if you could discipline yourself to be brief, if you do have something to offer, please do come forward. You don't have to, but you can if you want.
I have a comment.
Okay.
Are you asking these larger, I'm sorry. Yeah, I have a comment. Are you asking these larger retailers to maybe hire their own security staff?
They have loss prevention within their building, but a lot of the major corporations now don't allow them to engage. So a lot of stores don't even report it. We're getting civilians reporting it to us. So that's why we usually have the officers out in the parking lot watching and all that.
That's kind of sad. Oh, sorry. That's kind of sad.
You know,
because-
it's a liability problem for them. And Sunday night, we had an employee of Walmart get assaulted trying to stop
Yes,
people.
I heard that.
So again, it becomes a cost for them for liability.
Okay.
I learned a couple numbers this week that were kind of staggering. $2 million for Home Depot losses last year. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but I heard that from I think a pretty reliable source. $2.5 million from Walmart. And I just, it's not like Walmart's going to consult with anyone in this town about whether they're going to pick up shop or not. But I guess, do you have any sense for like how big of an issue it is for a company like Walmart, Home Depot, REI, Marshalls? These are all companies that are really doing all those major losses, And just like, there's got to be examples of them. I think like in Chicago, like Walmart just left. So, if that happens, that's kind of a major tax implication. People can't shop for just basic stuff. So obviously that's a big concern for me and should be for.
Well, I think both, REI and Walmart has stepped up to the plate and hired us. I know REI, if we can't do it, the sheriff's department is doing it. Chittenden County Sheriff is doing security at the Hannaford's on North Avenue in Burlington and Shelburne Road in South Burlington. So the corporate is reaching out to law enforcement. I guess it's a lot easier for us to get hurt than have one of your employees get hurt. But, again, we hear through the grapevines, again, we don't talk with corporate, we talk with loss prevention here. And we see it day in and day out, prime example was a week ago last Monday where we got calls for Home Depot, people scaling their racks and stealing things off that. And our officer pulled up in the front and somebody came out with a shopping cart with over $1,000. He wasn't even the one they were reporting on. We happened to catch him in that, so.
What sort of lobbying is being done, if any, from the town level, from Mayor, you, or anyone here to Sarah George's office? What sort of coordination is going on there?
She knows our feelings, and we understand her concerns. I think it's a combination of things like we're talking about, placing blame, but we're still looking at a 2-year backlog on cases, so that's a big concern. And last week, Stowe reporter, the state's attorney in Lamoille County stepped down, so they only have a part-time state's attorney there now. So it's an overwhelming effect, not on just, the businesses, society, but law enforcement. It's a combined problem. We've spoken with the Lake Champlain business community and gave them some, our concerns, but we have to follow her direction, and we send the cases there, and it's in her ballpark.
So there's no lobbying. I know you said she knows your opinion. Any other sort of coordinated lobbying that can be?
Well, I think we were talking about is our legislators need to look at the laws look at the laws on the books, change them. Our bail laws need to be looked at. Unfortunately, it's in the Constitution, so it's a constitutional change if we ever go that way, and it takes well over 2 years to get that done. Because both, it has to be presented twice in the legislative year to be voted on to make changes, but I think we need to allow the judges more opportunity to hold people. We need to have them include on conditions not to commit a similar offense, and that's not being checked. So again, it's just, we're frustrated as well as everybody else.
Thank you. So there is no formal action that we would take, but this is going to be an issue that we are going to be taking up, at least in part, in the budget coming up. So that's all I had to say. That's the end of my speech. But anyway, so Eric.
Sure. With, thank Jim again for all his work here, and Chief Bully and his staff for supporting that work. See, there's a number of recommendations before you. I think, as Ted says, the board works through this. Some of the fiscal pieces, will be coming up in the budget. If you want to fund some additional positions coming up for the next fiscal year, one thing for the board to consider is one of the recommendations is to task the town manager with implementing designing a 5-year implementation plan. So the board could think about, does it want to take a formal action or direction at a meeting for, that might be one of the first recommendations you could think about. I think that sends direction from the board of wanting to move forward with an implementation plan based on the report to get that step going. So that's certainly something that you could have on your head here in the short term.
So using the chair's privilege for a moment, I would think that maybe that's something we should seriously consider, because my concern is that when you get a report like this, and apparently the town has had 2 of them before any of us were members and before some of us even lived here, but nothing happened. So, I really don't want to see that happen here. So I think what I might recommend is that we set such a we set a decision on whether to direct the town manager and how to direct him at another agenda shortly in a future meeting coming up quickly.
I would probably like to have a more thoughtful discussion around the scope of that, because it shouldn't just be police, clearly. It should probably be public community safety, just the CJCs. I know it's part of the police department, but how do we include that? And it could be, it'd be an interesting discussion to talk about scope.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. So I think what I'm hearing is that we should put this on as a discussion item in another agenda, and make sure that it doesn't go away.
Yep.
So,
Yeah.
okay, is that the consensus of the board?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, and again, on behalf of the board, thank you very much to both of you. I know this is a lot of work, and thank you to everybody who contributed information and time and energy. So, thanks.
Thank you.
I'll remind you Saturday during budget hearing.
So next item on the agenda, Community Recreation Center and Library Addition Project. John and Jane, can you come up? And Todd? No, I agree. I didn't see, it's funny, I saw Todd come in, but then I didn't see him there, so it didn't register. I apologize. So, yeah, let's get a,
I can take things off, Ted.
yeah, please do.
So the the board had a special meeting at the end of October to hear the report from the steering committee on the community center and library. The recommendation from that report is to consider an addition of a library and a community center recreation facility in town. Realized, that's been a little over a month ago, and the board's had a lot on its plate here. Certainly it's a big topic, and this is on the agenda this evening. It's time for the board to debrief, ask questions on the report. Certainly no decision needs to be made by the board at this point. Help staff understand kind of your initial reactions, thoughts, questions, so we can make sure we get that information to you. Potential next step here with this project is to consider funding for a next phase. Well, suggestions with ARPA, it would be for schematic design elements for these facilities, and certainly for a community center, an analysis of a potential site for that. So that would be your decision point in the short term, should you like to pursue that on the fiscal ends here. I know Carla Carstens is also here, and then Lynn, who served on the steering committee as well, who can certainly assist in this discussion as well from the steering committee standpoint. We've got John Hemmelgarn, our lead consultant for Black Road Design, and Todd Glutton, our Recreation and Parks Director, and Jane Kearns, our Library Director, as well this evening. So
Great. So did you folks have preliminary comments you wanted to lead us off with, or did you want to do what the police people just did and just leave us hanging? You can say that.
I'm afraid we're probably going to do the same.
Okay.
I spoke for quite a while the other week.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So are there any follow-up questions and concerns from the board?
A really short meeting if nobody.
Well, I was reviewing the big book that you took the slides from, and I should have brought it tonight, but there was particularly about the library, and what was the final design was for a two-story building, but I was confused as to what was going to be in the older part of the library. Was there things going to be moved around or changed in the older part of the library?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's interesting. I mean, we only took this design so far to make sure that we had adequate space in the building to house the programs. In essence, a lot of that was going to remain similar. I think there were a couple of different designs that we came up with that would accommodate the program. It was, if you look at the plan diagrams that we did, you'll see that the Historical Society certainly was going to stay, I think, where it is, or that's our current leanings. And I want to stress that we've done essentially a conceptual or feasibility study here to really make certain that all of us feel comfortable that this can happen. What we haven't done is really gone into the multiple different design options that we would go back, in the case of the library, to Jane and her staff and the trustees and say, okay, you could lay it out this way, or you can lay it out this way, or you can lay it out this way. And we would have a really in-depth conversation about which serves the community best. We did a little bit of that at the phase that we were at, but we didn't want to spend too much time until we got kind of past a couple of these hurdles like you're going to be joining us for.
I understand the original concept, and that's fine. So, and Eric mentioned the costs that will now go with doing the specifications for it. Any idea of the cost for that?
To actually
Design and
to do the design for the remainder of the well, I think I gave Eric a little bit of a rough proposal for approximately another $100,000 to get us from here to a bond vote for two buildings.
Yeah.
Two fairly complex programs. One, a new building where we don't even know where it would go exactly, and that's another significant piece of work, is to find the site for that. Good news is, for the library, with the recommendation that we've given you, we're pretty clear on where, as a group, we think that should go. So that would get us to, we're assuming, a bond vote, unless Eric can pull a lot of grant money out of his pocket.
look forward to that.
That would be a lot. So that's really the next step, is that we would go there. And then typically design fees are frequently a percentage of the construction cost. That percentage is actually going down a little bit right now as construction costs have gone through the roof, but it's still, we started about at 10% on a decent sized project, and frequently as the project gets bigger, it goes down from there. But,
Good.
Terry, on that list of possible ARPA projects, I use those figures from John as that placeholder number to think about for potentially ARPA for the next phase.
Right, but again, the next phase is just to get you through to the bond vote. Beyond that, those costs for the design and contingencies and everything else we've talked about would be built into the bond amount. As it might be increased by any grants and other funding that you could come up with.
I just have to say that I was reading over the 2006 task force report, of which Terry and others in this room were on that task force. And at that time, it was only going to cost us $2 million to do all this. So clearly, Carla and Terry, if you'd gotten this done
Dragging our
in
feet.
2006, would have saved this town $40 million. So what struck me as I was going through it is I can, a little bit like you're saying, John, I can wrap my head around the library. I think it's really valuable. I think it's really needed. I like leaving it in the village. I think that meets a lot of the town's strategic goals. And then when it goes to the community center, well, I totally believe we need a community center, so leave it there. But it gets really amorphous for me as to what that would look like. And so I was reading through, like, there was, let's see, I forget which survey it was, but there was a lot of interest in a pool. But then after the pool, it dropped off really quickly. Now I see the pool sort of in our future expansion thing. So I'm feeling a little bit like if we plan, I don't want to even say phase one, because that sort of implies there's a phase two, but what we call the base plan doesn't have a pool in it. Do we lose a lot of interest from the town or not? I'm wondering
That's a really good question, and it's really hard
Thank you.
to get to that. We can, as I draw on some of my experience, the pool is a very specific purpose. It doesn't overlap very many of the other pieces of this project. I mean, to the extent that we could combine locker rooms, I think we talked about trying to do that. But, so pool or not pool is kind of a dividing line. Once you're not pool, then there's a whole lot of things that can fall under that umbrella.
phase one survey results, if you can find the graphic on there. It was recreation requests.
Is there a page?
Well, in this, it's page 10.
This one?
Yep. So that graphic over on the right there, it's like, it was so dramatic that people wanted a pool. And I think if I'm reading this right, these are actual request numbers. They're not percentages or anything, right? They're just request numbers.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So like half the people who responded wanted a pool.
Yes.
Does that mean we lose half of the support if there's no pool? That's a question for the people who put the survey together.
That's a question for all the people who are going to vote. The other thing is, I think there's a word cloud in here. That the pool is pretty big,
Right.
but it's like the only item in there that also has a
No pool.
counterbalancing no pool that shows up on that.
Yeah.
And so that was a concern, and and this is another component of this is kind of the revenue generation piece, or the cost of maintaining the pool, of operating the pool is actually significantly higher
Right.
than maintaining a gymnasium space.
Right. Right.
Or a yoga studio space. Those are a much more multi-purpose. They serve in some ways, in that space that costs a certain amount of money, serves an awful lot of those other bars that you see on the chart.
Right.
Whereas the pool is one space that adds, I don't remember the number, I want to say $17 million.
17
or
million.
something to.
I have it right here. 17 million.
So honestly, the committee spent a lot of time kind of talking about that, and they recognize this. But and Mary Claire's not here, but she talked, and Luann, you did too. you know, that would come up. There would be people that were just absolutely adamant that they did not want a pool. And that putting a pool in there was going to essentially lose their vote. And I'm sure there's people on the other side that would go the other way around, and not having it is going to lose that vote. So in some ways, it becomes a matter of where, as a community, do you think that the money is best spent to serve the most people in town?
I think I'm sort of landing on, before we get too far along, we probably need to figure out how to get an answer to that question, you know, if there's no pool, then, you know, kind of thing. And I don't know how we would do that. Probably need to go back to we had someone design the surveys for us, right, or manage that outreach for us.
So one of the things I can, speak to as from being on the committee, as John said, we really did weigh. I mean, because the pool, a lot of the kind of community catalyst for at least the community and recreation center process stemmed from community input that they wanted, these things. And so we wanted to make sure that we laid out there, that this was the costs, and that, when we did that first part of the survey, a lot of the kind of sentiments, not specific to spaces that were needed, but, they wanted a place to gather, they wanted a place to be together. And so, the community center design accomplishes those goals without the pool. And, I think in piecing the two sections out, we wanted to show people the cost of this, the reality of what this will mean for the town, and that we can accomplish some of these goals with, the other goal in mind. The option does exist to have two separate, items on ballot items on the bond vote. I mean, really could say, okay, here's community center phase 1, let's vote on that bond. And here's community center phase 2. Like, they could be pieced out on the same ballot potentially. But, wanted to really get to the crux of the space needs more than anything. Because time and time again, that's what we heard, from the same people who wanted the pool. Yes, pool, but the same people were also saying, well, a place to gather, a place to have intergenerational meetings, a place to share a meal together, a place for the kids to go after school, so they were all saying pool, but then, these are overlapping things. It's not because they could choose so many things. They were also saying all these other things that they wanted. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I had a question on this. It's like if you could ask for a pool and a walking track.
Right. And they were very,
but they didn't, they only asked for the pool.
Yeah.
So that's why I was
well,
like, wow.
individually, everybody was saying pool, but, not everybody said walking track, but a lot of people did, or not, a lot of
Everybody
people
said
said
farmer's market, indoor farmer's market. That's
Yeah.
fascinating.
But again, community spaces allow,
Well, I mean,
some of these things to happen. So
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that the concept of a double-decker, bond vote would be an interesting approach. I just want people to be really clear what they're getting. If they vote yes and they don't get a pool, and they say you said there was going to be a pool, that would not be super good. This I like. When we were talking about public safety, I was thinking that a community center with a teen center could be a really important part of a public safety plan. And maybe, I guess this may be for you, Todd, but are teen centers, I don't know of a lot of teen centers in Vermont that are effective outside of maybe the King Street Center, or, I mean, right. But outside of Burlington, is there?
No, not really. Most rec departments, even with their senior centers, it's not a standalone senior center or teen center. It's this multi-generational, and facilities or rooms are being multi-use, not just singularly used.
Yeah, I get the facility, but can you build a teen program without?
Yeah, definitely.
But there aren't any really.
Well, we don't have anywhere for them to go.
But do we have examples in Vermont of successful teen programs?
Well, the places you just mentioned,
Yeah.
the Boys Club, and I think Essex had a teen center at one point in time. So teens like to get away from school and, you know, go hang out somewhere and that kind of thing. But no, there's rec departments are doing teen programming, but you know, they're having to try to find facilities or whatever else, or if they have facilities, they're doing them in spaces that they also have adult classes in at night, whatever else. So, definitely with facilities, you can do teen programming.
Sounds like what you're imagining is like just more of like a free form, like place for teens to hang out. Is that what you're?
Well, I guess I'm
Thinking?
thinking if you're targeting a teen center to give kids positive activities and positive role models and mentors and intergenerational and all that kind of stuff, that's a heavy lift programmatically. You can't it's not just build a building and they will come.
So staffing is definitely one of the things we talked about.
If you build a building that say has a gymnasium in it, they will come, and you can have teen time of an open gym. We have an open gym for men and women right now for basketball and volleyball. We can do that for teens, but that's happening at 7 o'clock at night. They're not getting there at 7 o'clock at night. If they can get there right after school and do that would be good. But for them to come up and weight lift or cycle or whatever else, and you make a teen time to do that, and you have a specific time that it's for teens, so that time frame is for teens, they will come and use it. And when that's what you're doing is you have these open programs that are just teen time, and it can be weightlifting, and it can be using the machinery or whatever else, and you have a staff member that's just kind of, walking in the background and not interacting or whatever else, just kind of staying away and making sure that they're safe and doing what they're supposed to be doing. And then you can have some specific teen programs where you're saying, we're gonna, do this or we're gonna do that type of thing. But if you have a building, you're welcome to, and they'll come to, and there's things for them to do. Definitely. If you have a fitness center, room or whatever else, you could have teen fitness at a certain time. And that time is going to be right after school. There's that group that's going to go out and play sports and such, but there's be that group that isn't fitting in wherever, and they just kind of want to hang out and do their own thing, or hang out with a certain group of people, friends or whatever else.
We certainly see the teens in the library after school, but they are a challenge to engage. They're pretty busy teens in Williston.
Right,
so,
that's
yeah.
my experience.
But you just have to plan accordingly, give them a space.
Was there any reach out to other communities in Chittenden County that have a community center or family centers to know what their facilities are like and what kind of population they serve?
Burlington has the Miller Center, which is the old armory behind C.P. Smith School that they years ago now have created, turned into a community center and rec center. Colchester just broke ground about a month or two ago, and is building a new one. Probably within the next year to year and a half, you'll see something go up there. They have a base program as well, and with the future of a pool expansion, but it's not anything that they felt that they could afford, the community could afford at this time. And they're looking to build that and grow that, and then also over time have that bond go down or those expenses go down to be able to build a pool and save up to do that as well. So to answer your question about, should we build a pool now or later? Well, it depends on how much money that's gonna cost and what the town's willing to pay for, type of thing. That's really it in Chittenden County.
I believe the town of Milton's looking at a community facility as well, and their Bombardier Park area, they're building a new highway facility there, and I just from reading their select board minutes, just already town manager. I may have worked for previously, that's a discussion that they're having up there, and at the managers conference, a handful of other towns I was chatting with, further north, I think, Highgate, Cambridge, and these are smaller towns, but it was a common topic about community center, recreation center. What does that really mean? And similar municipal service facilities. So I'd say it's on the minds of a lot of communities around the state right now.
I could add that I have seen the preliminary plans for the center in Colchester, and the program is remarkably similar to what we've developed here.
Didn't they have some issue with that? Did they under budgeted or something? There was some fastouche with.
I'm not familiar with that portion of it. I am familiar through my work that these public projects are frequently under budgeted.
Yes.
You're trying to match the scope with what people can afford. And the goal of design teams is to get as much into that building as you can for the amount of money that's available. And that's really our goal here, is to adequately budget it and then maximize the benefit.
The final piece of this original scope too is we have some hours with a financial consultant and design a scope of work with them, just really helping us think about the financial aspect of this. As we look at things, typically we go through the Vermont Municipal Bond Bank, great partner in funding municipal projects, but I wanted some more knowledge about what's out there on a national scale. We started talking about $20 million plus for a bond, but it's a very significant amount of money. So if you have a 0.25 percentage point on your interest rate, makes a huge difference on your payments. And are there other financing options out there that, if the town wants to move forward, this could think about, even if they're capped at a certain amount, you could layer the debt with different lenders, things like that, just to be creative about this and think how to structure it from a fiscal end. Everything we asked them to do is kind of think about some initial potential revenue modeling generation as part of this. I think we have there's a few $1,000s in their scope, just to give us some preliminary ideas for some folks who have some expertise we could tap into.
When are we expecting that?
Probably January.
Yeah, I think you said mid-January.
Mid-January.
Mid-January should be available.
Yeah, the whole fee, no fee is like really important to know how we're thinking of moving forward before people get too serious about it. Because I like the idea of not having any fees, but I know that would be a huge, that would turn a lot of people off from voting for it if they know it's also going to be the operations budget's going to go up by 20 people, Todd? Is that what you said? I think they were part-time people. I think you said something like 20 staff members or something to staff it, but I think they were part-time.
Yeah, well, probably around 12 or so, but then you build in your contracted instructors and any part-time staff. And if you want to open the facility at 6 or 7 in the morning and keep it open till 10 o'clock at night, one person can't work all those hours. You're staggering. So it's probably equivalent to, a dozen to 15 full-time people, but a lot more than that if part-time, seasonal, or that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think the Colchester model is looking at a membership, at least part of what their revenue structure is there. And there's a lot of options that I could think about.
Just talking about the people, Jane, I think I saw that the library did not feel that they could staff a satellite, but if we're going to add 12 people for fitness, I think we could add a couple people for satellite. I do feel really bad that we don't have a library presence in Taft's Corners, so maybe just keep your mind open.
Yeah. Well, we still do have the bookmobile that, does outreach and, it's filling the gap for a lot of people who can't get to the library. So that's an option too, is to have regular hours, you know, at a new facility.
Yeah.
It's not just the staffing for the satellite. You know, you're also duplicating your collections, and people would really want the full services that you have at any library. So
Well-
you're really duplicating the whole thing.
Well, they might not get the full library experience, but, you know, it seems like if you're a mom with a couple of kids, you don't have a car, you know, if you could walk to the library, that would be huge. So it's just something to, I know you said no in the report, but just think about it a little bit, because like I said, if we're adding, you said something about like we couldn't do it with our staff, we'd have to expand staff. Well, you know, bring that to us. I just think it's an important service to provide, since there's no transportation up here anymore, so.
And it's true, there's also fairly limited transportation even to the growth center. And so I think we heard repeatedly, both in the outreach and amongst the group that we were meeting with, is that public transportation access to any of these facilities is absolutely critical.
Right?
And it needs to be improved from where it is now, regardless. And once those additional pieces are in place, then it's an additional jump from the growth center to the library. But again, the infrastructure is barely there at this point, you know.
Right.
Further discussions or comments? People who are on the, Carla, looking at you. You
But you have to stand up if
you
you
don't
get
have to say, you can say, no, I'm good, it's fine. I wanted to give people an opportunity.
Can you step up to the mic, please?
Oh,
Scott must be a baby.
Well, I think actually, I think that the committee and the library trustees, the town rec people, were very supportive of the final recommendation from John and that the committee presented. And it's going to be, you know, with this time and fiscal responsibilities and everyone's kind of hurting, it's a big decision as to what's going to happen next. But we're hopeful, the committee especially, that we can continue on this momentum and keep things going and have something happen as a result of this. And so I think that is what we want to see going forward, is the next steps and things moving on. And, you know, maybe something comes up, maybe it doesn't pass. I would hope that doesn't happen, but then that informs us about what's going on. And I think what we don't want to do is just sit on this information. We want it to keep moving forward. And I think that's the time for this to happen, and hopefully it will continue. So that's I guess what I'll.
Well, I'm gonna just say one more thing. So, and actually, Jean, you brought it up, there was we went through this process in 2006, and actually, I was on the rec committee in the 1900s, late 1900s. I had kids in that. So, we went through this process with Kelly Smith, and every time, and when I went in, and I gained a lot, and I loved the interview process and meeting with the people in Williston. But the people that have been here for a while, that have been interviewed 3 times, they've been given the same answers 3 times, and nothing's happened. Now, we've all brought up, we're in very tough financial times, and that's why I think, you know, you have to be careful how we bring this up. But the town has wanted this through at least 3 surveys or 3 processes like we've been through. And there was a couple people that I talked to that were a little bit miffed that, you know, they've done this 3 times and nothing's happened. And so that's why I said earlier, you know, we've got momentum going, and you know, everyone that's come and talked tonight and presented to you, they all want money. And they all need money. And, gosh, I'll give you my time, but I don't, we need more than just people coming to say they'll give you your time, because we need more than that. And that's why I say we have to kind of be creative, and I don't know the answer, but I think together as a group, we're a pretty smart town, you guys are smart. The people that were in the committee were very, very thoughtful, and I was grateful to be able to spend time with them, because everyone had a different viewpoint. And I will say, for one, I do want the pool, but I know by listening to the wise people in higher places that as much as we want, it's a huge expense. And when you're talking about fees, well, maybe if you wanted to use the pool, that would be where there'd be a fee, whereas other places you don't, when you have a membership. But I just hate that time, and it's not, I don't worry about my time, but I'm thinking about the people that gave me their time, and the students that gave me their time, that want something, and they're asking for this. I think we gotta just, Dave's put, and his company's put all this time into coming up with a very good product, I think. I just wish we could find a way to do it, and I don't know that answer. That's, Terry, what I have to say. And I just think we keep asking these questions, and at some point, people will say, why ask me? Because I've told you this many times and nothing's happened. So, I don't know the answer, but I think we can come with some.
I think the question before the board is, what do we do to make sure that we don't lose momentum and to keep this on our immediate radar? We do have the financing report that's going to be coming in January.
Yeah, we should have that in January, and I try to sequence all of these information for you as you think about, the ARPA fund is the pool of money potentially to draw from for this next phase of this project. It's kind of some of the themes would be the impactful projects that, we have that pool of money to think about, pool, no pun intended. So you have a lot of budget decisions to make here in the next 7 weeks or so. So this is something you could align as part of that process. Certainly if there's questions you have from staff to staff, it's a checkpoint in a process that has many different checkpoints in it. So the decision right next for you is a fiscal one, because there needs to be some additional work done to advance the project here.
There you go.
Sufficient for people?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we'll see what the financial report does, and we'll make sure that this is on our agenda in the near term.
Yep.
So,
Yeah, part of ARPA.
okay.
And I mean, what I heard was the money for the next phase is part of our budget decisions.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda, the fiscal year 2025 manager's budget transmittal. Always a
The room empties.
always an exciting part of our December.
I made some slides here as I typically try to do, so let's get this going. Shirley, do you want to join the table first? Sure. So I just review for the board. I transmitted the draft budget as we do every year last week. Got the binder. Binder does have the digital version. So a lot of this, I'll kind of go over process here. Every year, the town manager, as part of the charter, I'm tasked with drafting a budget review. It's a starting point every year. We take a lot of thought into the expense and revenue side, and there's usually some critical decision points to make along the way here. So what we try to do is give you a starting point of delivering municipal services that this budget reflects, the cost to provide those services, and thinking about additional or enhanced services and what those are, while balancing limited and challenging, frankly, revenue sources. Certainly property taxes being one of those. So Shirley does a huge amount of work as part of this. I'll say Shirley,
It's a team.
yeah, but generating the numbers is probably 75% or so Shirley generates for departments. These are wages, benefits, operational costs, splitting contracts among departments, advising department heads on current year spending and projecting spending. So Shirley really helps guide the formation of these numbers. Then Shirley and I work together on kind of big picture proposal with different elements for the board at this point. So what you'll receive tonight, I have a transmittal memo in front of your budget packet, so I'll kind of hit some points from that just to have it on your radar as we think about this. Then Saturday is more going through each department budget to hear, as department has to really hit the highlights there, and leave it over for any board questions about their operating expenses and capital expenses there. What else did I say? Another element we started a couple years ago is the planning department produces a growth report, and I think this is the third iteration of that report. So I've asked Matt and Emily in planning take the lead on producing this, and it's we're trying to think more indicators for services and trying to project, what's our service needs moving forward. And I think it's an art and a science trying to look at this modeling each year. So I've asked Matt when he's here Saturday to probably spend a good amount of his time with you, kind of walking you through that report, and we can have more time as well. But his operating budget as big as other operating budgets, some elements of it. So I budget his time there a bit. So I'll go through these slides and sort of open up for any questions the board has initially here. And this is kind of the road ahead here. So I'll go through some general themes, some assumptions and policy levers you'll have to look at our general and capital funds on a real high level. Talk about some revenue, including our fund balance, our option tax, ARPA funds, and then the next steps. So review the schedule. We're at the beginning this evening, the transmittal overview. Our Saturday is our budget review session. Then in January, we'll kick off a public hearing. The board will begin deliberations. Dedicated meeting 10 will be planned as an extra meeting on January 9th. And then the 17th, 24th, round out the month. Between those two nights, need to finalize the meeting and get that posted for town meeting by the end of January. The general themes of this budget, level services budget is what I asked departments to come to me with, how much it would be to continue operations for the services they provide. This represents that level funding. I think the only exception I built in was a few extra $1,000 of library requests for some additional library hours on weekends. The only kind of service level change in this initial draft. There's been, I'll go over here with some possible additions for services, mainly positions that I didn't include in the initial budget. I'll leave that for the board's discussion deliberation based on where we initially landed with the bottom line. It's the level of service that we have today. As every year, and even more pronounced this year's wages and benefits are driving our expenses. We have just under $10 million of our budget are wages and benefits. Our police and fire wages are tied to union contracts. We had further work to evaluate the added fire staff in 2021, projecting costs based on overtime and certification attainments during the year. The police MOU last spring to increase wages for police officers, facing some staffing challenges there to be competitive. That's reflected for the first time in this budget year, as that was a change for FY24 that wasn't previously budgeted that we worked out for this fiscal year. Now we need to budget that for 25. In addition, ongoing negotiation with the fire contract as well, all tied to these different elements of wages. Our health insurance increase, that we've changed our plan to make the increase not quite as bad, but it's still significant. That's built in as well. Other themes, and it's been similar, I've had this the last couple of years, employee recruitment and retention. It's maintain a competitive compensation structure in a challenging employment market. Service delivery from the town is centered on the town staff, and maintaining cost of living and merit increases for all staff, whether collectively bargained or unrepresented. So when we build a budget, we have to make some assumptions in trying to draft some numbers together. Budgets are our fiscal spending plan and revenue plan. Things certainly always change during the year, but we work to try to arrive at our best draft of where we think those trends are going to go, and we're going to balance the budget in a thoughtful manner here. So as we previewed to you a couple of weeks ago with our assessor, we're projecting a flat grand list growth that certainly correlates throughout our potential tax estimates here. And this is a conservative estimate based on, we know there's going to be utility reevaluations that will decrease their valuation. Also learning of a couple other recent sales that may have that effect as well. Then we have some added growth that's going to add to the grand list, but we feel those two factors are going to cancel each other out and create that net flat result. Our local options tax, it's Shirley and I were thinking about the methodology a bit more as we put this together. It's a volatile revenue source, so we've always taken a really conservative approach with it, especially coming out of the pandemic. We've seen the last couple of years really robust returns, so we've been a little more aggressive in how we model this, thinking of a growth factor as well. So that's something sort of for the board to think about here and try to decide how we want to predict that revenue. And we've been tending to have a lot of excess revenue there, so how do we want to focus that in the year itself and not have it lagging for future surplus? And then the town's unassigned fund balance and the ARPA funds as components of the operating budget, working to step down the use of both of those funds, have a big drop off. Try to be thoughtful about that. But there's certainly short-term pressure too, where those can help alleviate tax increases in the short term. But as Shirley and I spoke about this, our role is to alert you to the downstream effects of these things too, and not just the short-term effects of a budget over time for the town. So as I said, my direction to staff back in August was to submit budget proposals to provide our current level of services. If someone had a newer expanded service request, that was made separately to take under consideration. And the manager's budget reflects that level of services. We continue to see challenges with increased costs, especially equipment costs on the capital side, driven by inflation the last few years here. So by the numbers, I'm just pull a few of these exhibits from my transmittal. The bottom line is about an 8.7% expense increase, increases in property tax revenue in this model of about over $760,000. We're increasing our local option tax revenue model by over $500,000. Our other revenue categories with an overall decrease, these are what we contain with our fund balance and ARPA, also other things we're seeing there with recording fees have certainly gone down a bit. We also see ambulance revenue going up a bit. Our investment revenue with higher return rates we're seeing as in previous years with CDs, money market accounts, and trying to predict some of that as well. This all comes down to through this model, a tax rate increase of just over 3.5 cents, rounded around $34 per 100,000 of assessment, which means a median home assessment in Williston is about $300,000. You know, my book. So the median is you take all the homes and you line them up and value them. And that's the middle number. It's not, not the average. So half of the homes conceivably are going to pay graduated lower than that, and half graduated higher than that. And we've taken this metric the last couple of years to try to put some dollars with percentages here for folks. What's the number mean to them? So that tax increase for the median home would be about $106, or if you think about that on a monthly scale, say your taxes are escrowed $885 per month with this model. So one thing we like to do is look at the general fund in a couple different ways. I just pulled out here the by object expenses. It's kind of Shirley did a lot of work on this one this year to help kind of how we break these out to be able to update it quickly in future years. But we'll kind of just hit some of the highlights here on the budget side, or the expense side rather. Certainly, the wages and benefits are the primary driver here. For those reasons I mentioned earlier, the cost of living, 2% step merit increase, police department MOU, fire department wages as we true up the impact of new positions.
Can I interrupt?
Yep, go ahead.
Is this in our materials?
Yep.
What page is it?
11.
Thank you. Sorry.
Great, got it. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Just truing up with the fire department, actual cost of overtime, their minimum staffing, added certifications attaining to, Shirley did a really detailed dive into that with a couple of years' experience on those numbers as well. Our health insurance change, we would have seen a $250,000 increase with the old plan. It's a $130,000 increase with the plan change, so we were able to save a little bit from the increase with that plan change, but it's still a significant increase. We've seen our property and casualty insurance from VLCT passive increase. It's really driven by multiple factors. Our workers' compensation is calculated on a factor based on position, based on wage predictions. So increased wages, increased workers' compensation premium costs. We value our property every year. We reviewed it closely this year. We worked with the assessor's office. Aaron took the lead on that in the manager's office. We needed to increase the replacement valuation of some of our facilities, really based on current market factors for building replacement to make sure our premiums are accurate for what we're insuring. And then some claim exposure is factored in that as well. We've had a couple claims that have factored into that. I think as we focus on those to see if there's something that is kind of that we can work to prevent in the future, make sure staff is trained on that. Because they do a modification based on your exposure for workers' comp, especially where if you're limiting your exposure, you can get more of the credit from the municipal pool that we're insured by. So all those are factoring into that piece of it. General goods and services, trickle down here to other things that we contract for, our IT contract, legal costs a little bit, and then other outside contracts like Green Mountain Transit, their assessment had some increases this year as well. Our capital and debt, it shows a decrease, but overall we thought about how we accounted for a couple things. We chatted with our auditors too about it. We typically have used fund balance in the capital fund every year as a component, and we load that money through the general fund as a revenue to then expense out to the capital fund. Suggestion this year is to think about just committing that fund balance as part of your adoption of the capital budget rather than flowing it through the general fund. As we thought about that, we were essentially moving that money through the general fund and increasing the general fund's bottom line that was canceled out with that expensive revenue. So I built that into this model as something that just a little bit different this year.
So, and this might be one of those structural things I should take offline, but I guess I was going to ask where on the revenue side, there was a 147K that disappeared, fund balance capital.
Yep.
That was
that's
last year.
that.
So that's on the revenue side, and this is where it's on the expense side. I was just looking for the other side of it. If it's not in revenue, you must have been spending it on something on the expense side.
It was part of the transfer back to the capital fund.
Okay.
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, we'll do a structure.
So yeah, the end result was that we felt like we could cut to the chase here without
Right.
having that money flowing in and
Right.
out.
Can I ask what programs are? Number 4 programs. That's not a big number. I just didn't know what it was. I understand what equipment is.
A lot of it's Todd's programs.
Oh.
Library programs.
Oh, that kind of stuff.
Biggie pieces.
Okay.
In our overall, our debt service, we're seeing a little bit of increase there. Of our outstanding bonds, our interest payments go down a little bit every year as the principal's paid off. We have our new ambulances being reflected there for his principal payment, so that increased a little bit. Our years to come, I think there's a debt schedule you have in your capital packet, but the police and fire station bonds were 3 series, and those are going to start being paid off, I think, starting in FY 26 or 7 the first year. We also had a sidewalk bond about the same time, so that's going to free those debts are going to be paid off. So that liability will be removed. Potential new debt in the future, you could potentially replace some of that old debt with new debt, the same amount of money you were spending on debt. It won't cost the same as it was 20 years ago, but structurally, if debt is replaced, that's one thing. If there's a year without new debt coming off, that expense is going to fall off the books for a couple of years down the road here as we get close on those. Overall, our debt ratio is about 6.8% of our general fund is debt service. You'll see as part of this discussion for any new debt is the idea of the parking lot improvement project here around Town Hall and the fire suppression system at the Old Brick Church. That is also part of the ARPA discussion as well. Those are two larger projects here to think about. Also, in our buildings and grounds this year, we've made a change to reflect everything within that division of public works. So that's why you see that part of public works increasing a lot. We allocated these out to every department percentage wise, and we brought that all into the public works. As part of it, surely calculated that. Yeah. So those are pulling from everywhere to put into the department. That's coming from. The environmental reserve funds certainly. Important tool the town has used since 1990. We've been able to conserve over 3,000 acres of land. We have about 470,000 in the ERF right now. We invest that in CDs and money market accounts as well. I recall last year we funded about $50,000 to transfer in. I started out without putting funding there with another challenging year we had last year. I've initially put it at $10,000, and that's a result of just needing to make some difficult decisions in this draft, where this bottom line was originally, and just needing to find some things to trim before I transmit this to you. It was higher than I wanted it to be already. But I flagged that. I think you'll certainly hear from the community on that line item. It's an important line item. I don't want to underplay its importance. It's just there's a lot of tough fiscal decisions to think about here. And this isn't your only opportunity to put money in that fund. As you think about fund balance, local option tax receipts, you always have the opportunity to commit those funds to that reserve fund throughout the year too. So it's the budget's isn't your only shot. I'll just flag that. I'm sure you'll hear some more thoughts on that line item as you go through. So then the next piece I alluded to, I put this in my transmittal, to try to think about possible additions in staffing. There's certainly a dollar, there's a price that goes with these. That's staffing costs are one of the leading drivers here. So I've illustrated these to think about the recommendations from Jim Baker's report as maybe the first areas to focus on, the second police lieutenant, the police detective, and that detective is achieved by putting a current officer into that role and then backfilling with a new patrol officer. So we've modeled out what those costs would be. As an operating cost, that's inclusive of wages and benefits for those positions. I think our fully loaded benefit cost per full-time employee is around $20,000 per FTE. Healthcare is a real driver of that retirement pension cost as well. I've also included the HR director position in here. And then this third buildings and grounds parks full-time employee. We have a year-round part-time position at about 27 hours a week. That position has been open since last April. There's certainly a lot of work in buildings and grounds and parks. And one thing we're suggesting to think about moving towards the next few years is to expand that division. They have 2 full-time employees plus this part-time employee plus a seasonal parks person. We weren't able to fill the seasonal parks position last summer, so Todd spent all summer mornings outside mowing the parks. Nobody else to do it. It was a good job. It was helpful for him to be out there, but we don't want our recreation parks director to do that. So part of this is going to be thinking about expanding that division over time here. Certainly folks that when the parks aren't open, there's a lot of deferred building maintenance that we could have focus on. In the future, I'd like to recommend, we contract custodial out for the police and library right now. I think as we increase staffing there, we can absorb those tasks in-house. We just don't have the capacity right now for it. So those are just pressures on staffing to think about in the short term here. So I broke those out as additional to think about. I used a funding mechanism as the property tax to think about here, just to illustrate for you that same idea of a median home cost per year and per month with positions. You always have an option of starting a position partway through a fiscal year if you want, but you're going to defer that full cost to the next fiscal year as well. Just some things that have occurred in the past. Also for police positions, there's a federal program called the COPS program. The town can apply for that if new positions are authorized by voters at town meeting. The reward for that is $125,000 per position over 3 years. Given our number here to start a position, that's essentially about a third of that position each year or so. So it can be helpful and defer things, but it's not a huge pool of money, and you're gonna have to make that up over time. You could structure it in a way where you're graduating that funding in, granted, if you get the grant. City of Virgins was awarded a COPS grant last spring. I connected with their city manager on it a little bit. Said, hey, any recommendations you're thinking about? What's the payout like on it? And, they're certainly happy to collaborate with us more about how.
We would have to put that to a vote at town meeting?
You would have to have the positions approved in the budget.
Okay.
Not the grant itself, just the position would have to be approved by the voters.
You like our fire positions that we did a couple of years ago.
Yep, they'd have to be in the budget.
Yeah.
That's part of other expenses to think about. I think I might have froze, Scott.
What?
I think I froze my slide. Go ahead here. Yep.
Eric, outside the police department, were there other position requests?
No other position request. Public Works and Recreation and Parks both have the request for another full-time person.
Mm-hmm.
The way we did it last year was to take a seasonal, we tried to just tack on to seasonal or already budgeted positions and move them to full-time.
Mm-hmm.
So for this instance, the lesser cost was to advance this regular part-time to full-time. But certainly that one came up, and I said to the two of them, I'll recommend one more full-time position that we'd have to do some sharing like we do right now. So another one on the radar is continuing thinking about fire staffing moving ahead. We have the Triton report from a couple of years ago. That community-based strategic plan, I think, is really important in helping plot that future implementation for that. Thinking about that kind of 5-year plan for public safety, I'd suggest including the fire department in that as well.
Absolutely.
That full picture position. Those are what I received for at a request. It wasn't a whole lot. Staff, I understood where we were going.
So I have to ask because they were here. Did the CJC ask for a position? Or is that the board that's asking for a position?
That's from the board. There's been challenges there too with staffing. We had a second full-time position that left and weren't able to fill that position. So we've helped with the bridge here with 2 temporary part-time staff for June.
Mm-hmm.
Just to clarify, in the budget now, what we've done is we've funded 2 full-time positions, the director, sort of justice specialist, both full-time. I've also reached out, had communications with Heinsberg and Richmond about an allocation for next fiscal year. Richmond had a discussion with their board earlier last month, and they were certainly wanted to make a contribution into the next budget, so they're discussing that. I shared a similar communication with the Heinsberg town manager, and they were going to have that discussion. We were trying to talk about, some formula to share it, and we started out with population, and we don't have, back to data, we don't have good data based on kind of the cases per community, but also trying to think beyond just cases, just the availability of service indicators. So I have a meeting tomorrow morning as we're talking about some CJC operational items, case referrals, and I'm going to talk about that as well as kind of the data collection part of it. But I think on the CJC, certainly making sure we have that second full-time staff position is really important. We try to increase the starting wage for that in this budget proposal. We also know the state grant funding is going to be there, but we think it's going to decrease a little bit. So I think we were projecting maybe 120-ish from the state. And we overmatched for years. I think our contribution we budgeted was about $62,000 on in general fund plus our overhead that we estimate at about another $40,000. So the town's contribution towards CJC programming, both those elements about $100,000 per year. But that's where it is right now.
So the state funding is why we are obligated to support other towns?
Yeah,
Yeah, it's got a catchment area.
that's also, you know, in the original version of the budget, we just said, okay, if we get rid of the grant, because it does tie our hands in some aspects and just serve Williston. We went through that because we were waiting to get DOC funding. But that does make it hard. So we had a restorative justice specialist who was full-time, and the wage was a problem, but it's also you don't know from year to year whether you're gonna have a job, because you're always waiting for, are we gonna get DOC funding or not? So hopefully with this legislative session as well, there will be some new information coming along as well. So it's kind of hard to fill that
Sure.
full-time position, even though it's full-time with benefits, because of the unknown.
Sure.
I think certainly over time, the town, to continue with the CJC programming, will likely all come out of the town in a combination of surrounding towns' general funds. The challenge I have is the state's still going to fund it with $120,000 next year. Given the pressures I've built that in. So we can start weaning off that. I think it'd be good to start thinking about that the next few years. That was my original intent with this budget, was to kind of wean that percentage off from the state, but
Maybe not this year.
yeah, as we got through this in the last month or so, it just didn't make sense in how we were drafting this. But that's going to be something that's there. You know, say the state pulled the funding, you know, mid-year or something to continue the program. You know, we can look at the reserve fund or see how we're doing with revenue to, you know, to pick it up at that point in the year if we got kind of dire straits there. I think we can find creative ways to not say, well, the funding just went away all of a sudden. We can't support this program. It's certainly very important.
Okay.
But then I've got, then it's the last few years. Just to give you an idea in the county, kind of where our municipal property tax rate stacks up. We went from second lowest to third lowest. We passed St. George this current fiscal year. You know, this is not Chittenden County. Certainly, a lot of these towns are small. They don't provide the level of services Williston does, but to think we provide a robust public safety services here with police, fire, EMS, public works. You compare other towns that are at that level, you know, the South Burlingtons, really a lot in Burlington. Those are the other towns kind of above us on this rate list that have career fire EMS personnel. You know, a lot of these other towns are on-call volunteers. That's certainly a service investment, and the towns kept the rate low, primarily using the local option tax to offset that for over 20 years right now. But just to show, to kind of keep it in perspective with our neighbors, kind of what that rate looks like. And this is the current fiscal year, so with this proposal, it would increase the next fiscal year. And I thought with the grand list discussion, it would be interesting to look at the effects on this current draft tax rate increase based on, say, the grand list was going to be projected to grow a certain amount. So this table in the transmittal just kind of does that exercise to show you kind of what that effect would be on the median home per month with the grand list increase. We don't expect this to happen, but just give you some perspective on that. If the grand list was growing even 0.5% or 1%, we'd start seeing those, you know, that impact goes down a little bit. It's not, we're not talking about adding $20,000, $30,000 million value. It's going to have an impact. You see that more when you have a reappraisal. Essentially, when the reappraisal happens, the valuation will go up, the rate can go down, but then the net result is the taxes are around the same.
And this finalizes in the summertime? And when's the grand list get finalized? It's like in the summer, right?
Yeah, they have to finalize.
So the tax bills don't go out?
It's valued as of April 1st, and then it's finalized in early June or so by the listers. So that's reflected when you approve the tax rate. It's based on that approved grand list amount. Then the E&Os that you just completed last month is that opportunity for the calendar year to adjust that.
Okay.
So then going to the local option tax here, I included in the manager's report our first quarter receipts. So we brought in $1.2 million in the first quarter, maybe a little bit more than that, over $1 million in sales tax. And that's after the state keeps their the administrative fee of 3.8%. So that was about 330,000 greater than we budgeted for the first quarter of the year. We like to see this play out over the year, but it's interesting that quarter's been really high the last couple of years. This quarter, we're in the pre-holiday quarter, has historically been the highest, and then earlier in the January to March has been a little bit lower. But we're seeing especially the rooms and meals, alcohol tax receipts exceeding the pre-pandemic levels. Think about things like a couple new hotels in town. We're getting option tax every night for each room that's built there, so that adds to some of that revenue source. FY24, our receipts exceeded budget by $560,000. So we continue to take this kind of rolling 3-year average by quarter of receipts. And in addition, Shirley and I looked at the growth per quarter on a 3-year average to come up with what we're calling a growth rate that we want to add to this, because feeling we could budget a little bit more than we have here and trying to balance our revenues. So this factor we came up with was adding an additional 8% to sales and 12% for rooms, meals, and alcohol. Still feel this is likely a conservative estimate. We moved it a bit. We don't want to move it too much. It's kind of that trying to decide. Certainly it's at your discretion if you want us to change the model, if you want us to say that's too aggressive, we should budget lower. We can take we'll take your direction at that as the budget's finalized. If you want to budget more, we can go that direction. In the appendix of this transmittal, you'll see kind of our history the last 10 years or so by quarter. And I included a percentage change by quarter so you can kind of see what those fluctuations have looked like historically. That's what we were taking under advisement as we thought how to model this.
I think as you pointed out in your notes, there are can't get information from the state, like what's local and what's online. So what's driving that? So we have that historical information that would give us a lot more information to forecast from, but the state will not share it.
Yeah, there was some discussion last session about providing that information to say the chief executive, town manager, and select board, keeping it kind of non-publicly disclosed, because the concern is always someone will figure out how these businesses are doing and what their revenue looks like.
Oh, it's gonna tank the Walmart stock market.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if we could get anything else, we do our best to model by prior history, and we try to think, what's the macroeconomic indicators out there in the world right now. But that's all we have to go with this a lot. And, sure, when I say, oh, getting that report soon, hopefully it's good still. We don't, not to that extent, but, we see these trends. We want to make sure these trends are continuing. If we see really large scale departures from the trends, that starts to make us pause a bit and think about what our forecast is going to look like for the rest of the year. I like to share this. The local option tax receipts would offset our property tax rate with this model about 19.25 cents for FY25. So without that revenue source, taxes for the level of service today would need to be just over 19 cents higher. And that's the approach the town took with the local option tax when it was implemented. Other towns, for example, Colchester with Costco, their approach was to really use those receipts towards capital primarily. We do it in part because we use general fund, capital to some extent. But Colchester, they used a lot of that money towards that, big projects like the community center. That. So their bond vote was the net of what they had saved with the local option tax receipts from a capital standpoint. So this is kind of how Williston's approached this historically. It's part of where we are with a low tax rate, but there's other things you could think about doing with that money in the future, but it's not something I waded into right now.
Well, I mean, I think people would argue, I would argue that if we didn't have all those businesses, we wouldn't need quite as large a police force either. So, you know, that's why I think it needs to go against the operating to a high degree. Though it's nice to, and I appreciate the sentiment that I hear. It's like, well, if we have to put up with all this traffic, we ought to get something for it, right? So like, as a citizen, I ought to get my community center for the fact that I got to deal with all this traffic. It shouldn't all just go to supporting but it only goes so far.
Another thing Shirley and I look at every year is the unassigned fund balance. That's the board has a policy to keep 10 to 20% of the operating budget in this unassigned fund balance. What we've tried to do the last few years is model where that could end up. And again, we have to take some assumptions when we do this. We have our end of FY23 audited financials. We're right about $3.6 million in that fund balance. We've budgeted in FY24 to use about $550 for tax reduction, just a revenue source of the general fund, and about $150 towards capital projects. We back those out. We estimate what the fund balance would be if we needed to use all that money as budgeted. And granted, for many, many years, the town has not needed to dip into that as budgeted as a result of option tax coming in over budget, expenses that are under, and just the way the books ended the year. I say this every last 3 years, I think at least, that's not going to always be the case. So we have to be prepared for that's going to change at some point, and not to just bank on that as a filler in the revenue every year for the budget. In this fund balance model for the end of this fiscal year, we built an additional $325,000, exceeding local option tax receipts based on that first quarter, based on this kind of growth model. We still think that may be a little bit conservative, but we'd like to be in that ballpark. Estimate that. So that's how we modeled this projection, and then we've entered in this budget proposal just over $510,000 for tax reduction, and about $170,000 to use for capital as part of that capital discussion. And that leaves the estimated fund balance of just under $2.5 million, and it's about 16.3% of the draft bottom line of this operating budget. We had to make a lot of assumptions there, but this is ultimately the board's comfort level within your policy of how much fund balance you want to allocate. This is an area if you could use it towards potential tax reduction, but again, trying to be mindful of the downstream effects here, where if, originally we had this at about $460,000 for tax reduction, and then in our final days of budget modeling, some additional expense information that came in, we needed more revenue, and we increased this a little bit to balance the budget. Trying to wean that down. This is essentially your rainy day fund if you have a big expense that's unbudgeted come up. Thankfully, with the July flooding, we're getting some FEMA funding for like Butternut Road with the damage up there. We just have a small local match that will be spread over a few years here. But if we had a real catastrophic event that wasn't insured or funded in another way, we'd have to look here in the short term to fund it. So that's always kind of what it's intended for, is to make sure we have some backup funds there.
So using our budget that we have presented and using the Government Finance Officers Association model of 2 months of your budget, I just took the 15 million divided by 12 times 2, and that's 2.5 million, is how they anticipate the minimum you should have in your reserve. So we're in that ballpark.
And same with ARPA funds. We've built some ARPA fund use in the general fund the last few years, 300,000 in FY23, stepped it down to 125 in FY24. In this draft, we've included 75 for revenue. We have to use it this year. It's the last opportunity to use some ARPA. The board used it to help with the impact of the additional fire staff the first year, with the intent of stepping it down over time. Again, we didn't need to use the 300,000 in FY23. Good problem to have because of the way we ended the year. But again, the board could think about using this amount, a lesser amount, a greater amount, but it has to be spent next year, and it's going to go away. So it's going to create a revenue hole for operations within this budget that has to be filled with other revenues in FY24. continue to step it down. We'd like to eliminate it if we could this year, but just based on where we were with this particular model of the track, this is where we landed as a starting point for your discussion. And then I think I mentioned one binder this year as the capital in the second half. We've highlighted the capital tab. That is a transmittal too with the different elements. The real big impact here is cost of equipment, especially public works. We have the 8 dump trucks, and every 7 years we need to replace 2 of them. This is that year added cost for these trucks. So
I'm glad I made it.
yeah. So one
Feel
suggestion.
lucky, right?
I know, I'm lucky. I might, if it was last year, I may not make it 8 years.
So suggesting use ARPA towards that second truck purchase this year, and then we use these sinking funds. We try to see the life of the asset and what the replacement value is going to be. We updated a lot of those numbers this year based on the current cost to buy trucks and leased cars. And, I've tried to smooth that a little bit with some ARPA allocations, like towards the police cruiser fund, for example, just to help with the cost of these things. That you have a more year ARPA to think about with some of these equipment pressures on capital. There's over $1 million in ARPA suggestions within the capital budget. Those mirror a lot of things that I transmitted to you, including the parking lot project, Brick Church. So you'll see in there, that's an idea for ARPA. There's discretion that you have to how you want to spend it, but some of these things that are more operational, with the equipment replacement, those are shorter term needs where if we didn't use ARPA for it and we want to continue that equipment replacement, we have to think about how else we were going to do that. So just to flag that. And we continue to look at our energy plan goals and our capital equipment. We have a $75,000 earmark from the federal government based on our population to spend on climate change mitigation. So Melinda's been working on some ideas there, and what we're looking at probably this current fiscal year is to some electric mowers for our parks and buildings and grounds fleet. We need to expand the fleet anyway. And then thinking about a potential staff fleet vehicle. Somebody's go to a meeting, go to a zoning inspection, go down to Montpelier for something. They take the EV instead of their personal vehicle and get mileage. We think that might be a good initial step to start showing a proactive electrification of our fleet services here. So those aren't in this capital plan because that will likely hit the current year's budget. I'll come back to the board to approve any purchases with those funds before we make them. So finally, wrapping up here. As you go through all this, I like to highlight the policy levers you have to pull here. Both sides of the budget. So the general fund expenses, where you want to land there, where your bottom line is going to be. As you go through each department, ask questions you have in the department for their line items. I'll ask them to highlight the larger variances. I won't ask them to go line by line. So it's gonna be a long day Saturday, so we're not gonna get longer with that. But there's room for you to ask any questions you have about their budgets. The property taxes, the projected amount to raise, and the draft rate here. That's something for you to decide how you want to build that. The use of fund balance, the ARPA for capital needs, the operating budget. This idea of any new debt for the parking lot or the fire suppression system at the old Brick Church in terms of a bond vote. Unless there's opposition from the board, I'm likely going to ask the town attorney this month just to draw up. There's some legal documents we would need to accompany a bond vote. They get very busy in January with that, so I'll have those on hand should the board want to proceed, and if not, we can save them for some future time. Is a presidential election year in 2024, so if there was thought of delaying a bond vote, you could have a special meeting next November to the large potential turnout of voters as well for some of these things. But the challenge with ARPA there too to supplement it would be that deadline of December to make the ARPA commitments too. So we want to some of that as well. That is all I have here. A little bit longer than I wanted to.
Might be a structural question, but it's because I don't have this much revenue to play with in my other budget. But so at the school budget, the voters authorize a spending level. And you're not really supposed to spend above that. Sometimes you have to, right? But you don't spend above that. So if the town votes a spending level, and then you realize your grand list really did go up 2%, and you have more headroom, you could spend more. Are you really not supposed to, I mean, by statute, you're not supposed to spend more than the voters authorized? Or is that not a thing at the town?
Yeah, it would depend, I think, on the other scenario too, where you have unanticipated expenses that come up and you're gonna go over your budget.
Yeah. I mean, if you have an emergency, what are they gonna do? But
Yeah.
we couldn't make a decision that we're gonna spend another $500,000 on something because that's beyond what the voters authorized, I guess.
Yeah, essentially that bottom line is the target every year. You know, and as it ties to the tax rate, the warning itself will say a budget of X amount with X amount to be raised by taxes.
Right.
So even if the grand list went up and you come back in July and say, oh, the grand list went up, we don't want to raise as much in taxes, you have to raise that amount of money because that's what the voters authorized to raise. I think that came up maybe a couple of years ago.
Yeah. I guess I was thinking more like if you're conservative on the revenue, then you have to take your expenses down. If you're not conservative on the revenue, I'm not talking wildly, but if you're not conservative, if you lean in a little bit more on the revenue so that you can afford more things in your budget, the worst that can happen is things don't materialize and you have to move the dump truck out another year. I mean, I'm not know if I'm articulating it well.
Yeah, I think so.
Like you don't want to be too conservative because then if you get the money, you can't spend it.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, so that's kind of the thought. It sounds like it's kind of a mid-year budget adjustment.
Mm-hmm.
The revenues aren't hitting their targets and then deferring something
Right.
at that point.
That works on the downside because no one's going to argue if you spend less than was your authorized, but spending more than you're authorized
Yeah,
could get you in trouble, right?
yeah.
Okay, sounds a little bit like,
Well, I was gonna say, and that would be if it was something very specific, that's when we might have a request to you to authorize us to use the unrestricted fund balance.
oh,
We haven't done that before because luckily we've had revenue in excess of budget or expenses.
We used a little bit with the fire staff was added. We had them start at the end of a fiscal year, I think in April or May. We used
Yep,
the
in
unassigned
April.
fund balance to basically cover the payroll for 2 months.
Yep.
interesting. Okay.
And then our for the equipment ads.
Okay. We can ask him questions now, but we're gonna have him all day Saturday. So,
It's the work ahead for you. That's-
it's great.
It's been circled on my calendar with little stars on it.
Great, Lisa. Okay, great. Manager's report?
Yep, and you got the quarterly report distributed. Doing a great job putting those together. Reminder for Saturday, 9 to 3. We have a lunch break built in. Does you want me to get any food? Does the board just want to bring a lunchbox, right? Just so I know if there's anything you want me to arrange here.
I was going to ask you for
Dessert.
your cooking, but
I was gonna ask you the same question.
What are people thinking?
I think it'd be easier if we ordered out something, but I'd be happy to chip in for it. We could just do that first or something. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
Send someone down to Chef's Corners or something.
Like, yeah, okay, let's do that.
Okay. I'll bring a menu so we can have everyone decide when they get here what they'd like.
Great.
Sunday runner. Laser specific plan, that'll be January 16th, so we'll get that warrant
Great.
here in the next week or so. EV charging station's gonna be installed over there, so I got back yesterday, but they should be working to install that soon if they haven't already.
Where is it? Because I drove by with my needle going down and I didn't see it. Where is that supposed to be?
When you go towards Village Community Park, right
Yeah.
before you get to the gate there on the left.
Oh,
So maybe with
oh, there was a car there. I didn't go all the way up that far. Okay.
So this is, I mean, you may not know the answer to this very specific question. I know that obviously there's different types of EV charging. Is it like the universal supercharger or is it like, do we know what?
I'll ask about which one we'll pick.
probably not
I know
at
it's one that will support.
I'm guessing that, yeah.
That will support many vehicles.
Okay. Okay.
And again, it's just the video. local option tax. Oh, ARPA worksheets. So I included in your packet from the retreat a worksheet. I basically added a column to give you kind of a workspace. And then I distributed tonight a report from Bruce, our Public Works Director, kind of an overview of our infrastructure, and then just kind of his updated thoughts on kind of priorities for projects. I asked Bruce on Saturday if there's time during his budget discussion we can answer questions the board has after that. So understanding kind of your homework over the next month, kind of work on your preliminary ideas with ARPA.
I was able to cut and paste your document into an Excel spreadsheet so that it would add up for me. So I'll send it around if anybody would prefer Excel.
Yeah.
But I also, it would probably be good if we, I think you said there were a few other things that came up, like donations to a food shelf or our committee or something for nonprofits. So it'd be good if we all kind of had the same understanding of what those were.
Sure.
So I'd be happy to send my list around and you can add or subtract or whatever, but it would probably be good if we all had the same list.
Sure, and I can, what I did with putting this together, we had all kind of those community generated ideas too. I can certainly add some of those in. The food shelf request, I asked Bruce to follow up with those requests from our fire district, Porterwood and Wilson Woods. So we've reminded them, made them aware of this ongoing discussion as well. We had some of those here this evening with kind of new thing that was brought up to septic.
Would you be willing to also update it to indicate which items you have included in the budget?
Sure.
That way we know what, assuming that those items got past the budget,
Yeah.
that then what other money there is to be spent separate from that.
Sure. I'll make those two changes.
Yeah, because there was one of them, like, I think I'm thinking one of your line items was like the 75,000 that is in the budget, but it was also on the sheet. So I was thinking that if I didn't put it on the sheet, it'd give your budget a problem.
It would.
Yes, okay.
I
put it on my total. It's okay.
Yeah, good question. I had to build in some assumptions here.
Yeah.
Ultimately,
So these things are in the budget, and so they either, okay.
Yeah.
Don't take them, you have to count
If you
them, or you're
remove
gonna
them, you have to.
to.
You want to keep them in the budget.
Yeah.
You don't want Eric to have a heart attack. Like, put those things in this column.
And I know for like the other social services committee,
That's
they
it.
get a request from them to increase that line item. I increased in the draft budget $2,000 from the general fund. It's $30,000. It's been $30,000 for a number of years. I know there's certainly a lot of need out there. So it's part of all these things to balance.
Yeah, I mean, the ARPA thing would really just be, we know you did a lot that drained down your funds during COVID. This is a one-time. Don't get used to it. Don't build it in your budget, but yeah, this is a one-time.
Would we need to give them stipulations to spend it? Like if we say designated $50,000 like the social services, would they still have to like physically spend that money before 2026? Like they would have to, we'd need to make sure that or once it's out of our hands,
Money's fungible.
Yep.
Spent.
Once
Okay.
it's out of our hands and we've spent it, we do not have to make sure that they spent it.
Okay.
So we essentially granted it out. That's the end of the
Yep.
application.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
The police numbers in the quarterly report were a little frightening, going up and up and up. Yeah.
I think we had 20 instances of retail theft on one day a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
Other business? Any? No.
Catering permits.
Okay. Final thoughts on agenda items from this meeting? Any? Okay. Hearing none, I will declare us adjourned. Thank you.